out one each on a bead chain, in the order that they were written in the text. So you could literally hold out the bead chain and read the first verse of Genesis. And then I took the bead chain and curled it up on itself so that the same letters lined up. Now, I'm going to hold up the pattern that we got when we associated the letters slot A in tab A, tab B in slot B, etc., just like the paper pattern. And as you can see, all the letters are accounted for. Two-dimensional surface on a torus. So we've now identified the first verse of Genesis. It folds itself up into a donut. This is the bagel theory of reality. You just peel the 7-color map off of the donut, and you have a little vortex. This is the definition of the donut. You don't need the rest of the donut. Mathematicians don't need the dough. They just want to know what the surface is, how it all fits together. They don't. And what we found, and this is really quite startling, is when we simplified it mathematically, we ended up producing a form that looked just like this. This is the form we actually made. This is a minimal geometric way to represent the way the first verse of Genesis forms itself when its letters are paired up, just like making a paper model. Now, you'll probably notice, particularly if you know something of Jewish tradition and teaching, that this looks a little like a flame. And the letters are said to come from the flame or from fire. They were written in fire on the original tablets given to Moshe. If you look at this form from different directions, you can see all shadows, two-dimensional outlines of all the Hebrew letters. We're pretty sure the same form, or some very, very closely related form, produces the Arabic letters, and a related form, but not quite the same, produces the Greek letters. And so we've got the first verse of Genesis folding itself up into a form that, when you look at the form from different directions, makes all the letters in which the text is written. And so we have our fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. And when we look at it from the appropriate directions, for instance, that direction, let me hold it here, it might be easier, we see the Hebrew letter bait. The English equivalent would be the letter B, the Greek would be beta. This object, this entirely asymmetrical object, which in the past we've identified as a flame of consciousness. Hebrew letters are said to come from flame. Arabic letters are said to come from flame. Shadows of this object are all of these Hebrew letters. Same one object generates all of these letters of the alphabet.
Then in the midst of the flames, and the darkness grew, there one that drove forth the night, flaming, expanding, ever brighter, until at last was nothing but light. Then spoke my guide, the voice of the Master, see your own soul as it grows in the light, free now forever from the Lord of the night. Deep in the halls of life grew a flower, flaming, expanding, driving backward the night. Placed in the center a ray of great potence, life-giving, light-giving, filling with power all who came near it. Placed they around it thrones 32, places for each of the children of light. Placed so that they were bathed in its radiance, filled with the life from the eternal light. There, time after time, placed they their first created bodies, so that they might be filled with the spirit of life. Seated within the flower of radiance sit 7 lords from the space-times above us, helping and guiding through infinite wisdom, the pathway through time of the children of men. Mighty and strange, they veiled with their power, silent, all-knowing, drawing the life force, different yet one with the children of men, aye, different and yet one with the children of light. Those are the Hermetic principles.
Matter of fact, here is a text written in an alphabet that curls itself up into a form that casts shadows that are the letters that the text is written in. Fruit tree yielding fruit whose seed is in itself. That is very self-embedded. That is very self-referential. That's a very reflexive process. It's creating its own letters in which it's written. Again, this is a key idea. But don't be overly impressed.
Raised in the hand of the figure, forth came a flame that grew clear and bright, rolled back swiftly the curtain of darkness, unveiled the hall from the darkness of night. Then grew in the great space before me, flame after flame from the veil of the night. Uncounted millions leaped they before me, some flaming forth as flowers of fire. Others there were that shed a dim radiance, glowing but faintly from out of the night. Some there were that faded swiftly, others that grew from a small spark of light, each surrounded by its dim veil of darkness, yet flaming with light that could never be quenched. Coming and going, like fireflies in springtime, filled they the space with light and with life.
Taken a coat hanger and bent it up with a couple of squiggles and played around with my shadows, I'd have found all the letters in just about any alphabet. It is not hard to find shadows of a squiggly form that look like letters. It's hard to find a explicit, meaningful form that does that. And so it's the fact that that's a meaningful form that counts, not just that you can make shadowgrams that make letters. We've also discovered, even more startlingly, that this is not just a flame representing the flame of consciousness, but it's also a model hand representing our self-awareness. It's our hand that designates us as special in the animal world. It's our opposable thumb that is associated with our ability to make and use language and to make and use tools. It is from the word for hand in Latin, manus, that we are called humans. And further, it's from the region of our mind that controls our hand that we derive the regions that control our speech. And there is another point that needs to be added. Not only in Hebrew tradition is it taught that the letters are made of fire or flame, but they are also said to come from Yod. And that is taken to mean the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Yod, which is the component that makes up all the letter shapes. But Yod also means hand, this hand. And when you look at this form from various different positions, you see all of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. When you make different gestures with your own hands, you see different outlines, different shadows of the same model. In fact, you can see all the Hebrew letters. And you know what? Each Hebrew letter has a name. And the name of the letter Pei, its name means mouth. And you see it when you make this gesture. That's the Hebrew letter Pei. Now you'll see it in my left hand, I'll see it in my right hand. So it's a symmetrical set. This gesture produces the letter Zion. Anybody want to guess what Zion means? How about project? That's not a big secret. The human hand is the human embodiment of a general principle that projects consciousness into physics. And if we look at that general principle of projection from all the possible directions we can look at it,
so simple. That is crazy.
Then we can, in theory, take any path possible in consciousness or in physics. So what we're finding is that there is a general principle that models the way we project our will into the world, which is an analogy for the way, if I can say, about project. That's not a big secret. The human hand is the human embodiment of a general principle that projects consciousness into physics.
Which brings me to this symbol, which Phil so eloquently described to me. Okay, now this right here, the Jed pillar, represents the spine. This is the Ankh cycle of life. Thoth, the flame of consciousness. This, along with the Ankh, is a symbol for Pluto, and that's how I came to this, to be honest with you. Was I was looking at solar system scope and came up with it. Okay, so but it's a gesture, just like that guy was saying, like Tenen was just saying about, you know, praise or a receiving of holiness. Okay, this represents the red sun, or all of our consciousness. Okay, you following me so far? These deities right here, these women, they're in the female form and sitting the way they're sitting because they're projecting themselves as equals. That's why they're exactly the same on both sides. So what does that say? Well, you see, this one's got a chalice on its head, on her head. That's a female. This one's got a obelisk, or a phallus, which is a male. So we have a male on this side and a female on this side. Okay? But they're both females. So what does that tell you? Oh, wow. That's the gray matter of our brain. It's our brain in equilibrium. So then this is where I was stuck. I was stuck at where? What is this? Well, I seen that movie, A Star is Born. And as you all well know, I've been praising that movie and it stuck with me. Something got in my head about that movie. And I realized when Phil told me this, he said, "You notice what they're kneeling on, Steve?" And I said, "No, what are they kneeling on?" These are eyebrows. These are eyelashes. This is the bridge of a nose. This is the top of the head. You're looking at the glyph telling us that our reality is created through our Jed pillar, which is man at one with the truth. The four elements pulled in together into the center of all things of the Jed. That's what the Jed represents. Is that all four elements of our creation are as one. So we're at one with the truth, holding up the Ankh, the creation, symbol for creation, the life and death, and it's praising the wisdom of all. That is exactly what Tenen just said about the hand and when we're self-aware. So knowing oneself, that you're conscious, is the first step. So we're self-aware. So what's the next step, guys? Understanding, just like on the chakras, or the tree of life. Chakma, Bina, knowing, understanding. Haha. And this is the Kether, on the tree of life. Pluto. That's the one who weighs and balances. Weighs and balances the knowledge of men. Boom.
Directions we can look at it. Then we can, in theory, take any path possible in consciousness or in physics. So what we're finding is that there is a general principle that models the way we project our will into the world, which is an analogy for the way, if I can say this, God's will is projected into the world through us. That this is a cascade of creation, that we are in the line of this cascade, and that this is a model of it. Is that if it is so, then there's a lot of readjustment to make. And I try to explain to people that this really doesn't say anything like I'm right and you're all wrong. It says rather that this is a deeper level that integrates a whole range of material, and it demonstrates mostly that what the scholars have been saying and what the religious people have been saying and what the different religious people have been saying, they've all been right, but in their own contexts. And that if you go deeper, then you find something more common. Let me say it. I think that if we get this right, if we can figure out what this natural unfoldment is, and we keep track of it in the way that was intended, which is going to be the most compact and economical way, we are going to be able to show that the sequence of letters in the text of Genesis is just as determined as the sequence of digits in the decimal expansion for pi. That is a natural artifact of this universe at the level. In fact, that quality is very similar to pi. After all, the text, you're not supposed to change a letter. It would be the destruction of the universe. If you changed any digit in pi, it wouldn't be pi.
And I think your use of the mathematical metaphor here is not just an accident.
No, not at all, because mathematically, we understand the idea of truth as modeling something experimental that we find in the real world. If someone says they have a truth and they use a spiritual sense, we tend to laugh at them. Well, your truth, whose truth is truth? But if these texts were canonized based on the fact that the sequence of letters was as precise and explicit as the sequence of digits in, say, a universal constant like pi, then we have a whole different understanding of what might have been meant by the various sages of these various traditions claiming they had the truth. Mm-hmm. This is the letter bet, bait. It's the first letter of the text of Genesis. It's the one translated in the. Its formal meaning is house. But God's not a noun, God's a verb. And Hebrew is a real mode language. That means the primary roots are verbs, not nouns. So it's not a house, it's housing. It's what a house does. Most people don't pay any attention to this. But in fact, you can check the references. I think even David Bohm mentions this in the Quantum Reality book, which is so wonderful. A bait represents the distinction between inside and outside. And that's going to turn out to be enormously important. The credo of Judaism, what Abraham is credited with discovering, is the unity of inside and outside. There's a 4-letter name and a 5-letter name for God. The 4-letter name is the transcendent point within. The 5-letter name is all there is, the panoply, the immanence of the universe. Many people over the centuries have had meditational experiences, have come upon that one point of light, that meditational and transcendental point within. And people for centuries have worshipped idols and gods of all kinds. And everyone knows, or at least most people in this room know, that if you do your affirmations, even if it's to a pagan golden calf or something, you're going to get what you want, because the process of affirmation causes manifestation. The key to this teaching, on which the Abrahamic faiths are based, are identical, are unique. That's what Krishna was saying too. That the God within, the point, the meditational point, and the all there is, the panoply of nature in the physical world, the God of immanence, are one, are unity. Inside, outside, and the process of resolving them is also unity. This is the first word of Genesis. Let's look at the first word of Genesis. It's supposed to contain the whole secret. It's supposed to be able to repeat this bait, this basic idea in more detail. So here's the bait. which means in or in the. And then we have this word reshis, which is said to mean at the head of, because the word resh means head. Well, there's another root in here, which is not usually discussed, and that's this root, reshet. Reshet is a woven net, or network.
Netters.
And I'm going to say that the reason the academic statisticians have found letter skip patterns in the Hebrew Bible is because it's a woven document, like a Navajo rug with stripes. And if you unravel it, you get skip patterns on the thread, because that's what the stripes leave. And I'm going to say that that's the kind of coding that was done in the ancient world, and hopefully we'll get to that. That this is a wonderful model of everything. By definition, this isn't a jealous God of a petty people who says, my God's bigger and better than your God because it's my God, and it's the one God because I say so. That's not what we're saying here. I'm saying we are starting with a definition of singularity and wholeness. Definitions are not the basis of prejudice. It's a postulate. Putting it down to see how good it is doesn't give us anything. And if we look for the means of spanning between the one and the many, we have a path that includes everything in the universe. Now, modern physics attempts a bottom-up reconstruction. Take all the diversity we find, all the forces in the world, and pump the energy up until things merge together, and eventually we can extrapolate and find the Big Bang. The one from the many. And I'm saying we can do this abstractly. We can do this topologically in principle, without any electron microscopes and cyclotrons and supercomputers. We can start top-down by definition, start with a singularity, break it up by minimal first distinction, and end up with all there is. And it's my guess, and this is still a guess, that one way or another, in an extraordinarily elegant way, perhaps the most elegant possible, that's what the sequence of letters in the Hebrew Bible really represents. If we look at religion, if we look at history as static, then we've got a fossilized structure that's not alive. But if we look at a living tradition, it's just like a living thing. A tree doesn't look the same during all phases of its life. Sometimes it looks like an acorn, sometimes it looks like a tree, sometimes it looks like leaves and branches, sometimes it's all desiccated, sometimes the new fruit has to fall on the ground and decay. The current phase of the Jewish cycle is to be a vessel. The rabbis have created this incredibly coherent vessel that survived thousands of years of persecution and has continued to carry the Torah intact, and in principle the light in that Torah, the meditation, the science of consciousness in that Torah, through the centuries. Now one doesn't mistake the vessel for the light inside. One doesn't mistake a librarian for a person who has command of knowledge in the encyclopedia. Those are two different functions. The rabbis, for people doing that hard work, this well would have dried up. And I am doing research that's benefiting from the sweet water this tradition has preserved. So I have to honor that. And I think that's a very valid way to respond to traditional teachings. We have a vessel. In order to get into the vessel, you have to respect the vessel, you have to be part of it, and then it can open. And then what's inside is worth even more. Demonstrating to the scientific community that traditional material handed down over thousands of years is valid today will provide great respect for the traditional material. And demonstrating to observant people, to religiously intense people, that what they've been protecting and carrying all these years is now respected in the world will enable them to open to the world a little more, be somewhat less defensive.
Hallelujah.
I don't mean this is some sort of panacea. But this is part of a legitimate bridge between various seemingly opposite elements in our society, whether it's science and religion, whether it's generate other sacred alphabets that came later, the Greek alphabet, the Arabic alphabet, were also generated by the same form that the beginning of the text of Genesis draws for us. So we ought to be able to show that some of these other traditions have a connection at this mathematical level, at this consciousness level, and that thereby traditions can respect each other. The
This isn't a matter of making everybody's religion the same. Far from it. Those are totally different embodiments. We approach different directions. But the basis, the common element in our consciousness, in our hands, literally, is what we have. And it's the alphabet. And I think that's very good.
In attempting to unfold the text of Genesis, Stan Tenen has created the beginnings of a wonderful geometric language. Using real and deep mathematical structures, the language is a new alphabet of geometric forms that may solve the riddle of Genesis. The riddle of Genesis, folks, is the simple fact that we create the spark that powers the universe. It is in our consciousness. Plain and simple.